welcome back. This is going to be our second lesson in this class, and it's going to focus on the idea of differentiation. I thought today I would put a thought on the board about gifted, and last time we had discussed the idea of the intensities that gifted students often feel. And so this poem by Pearl Buck I felt was just really powerful, and I wanted to share it with you today. The truly creative mind in any field is no more than this, a human creature born abnormally and humanly sensitive. To him, a touch is a blow, a sound is a noise, a misfortune is a tragedy, a joy is an ecstasy, a friend is a lover is God, and failure is death. Add to this the crueling, delicate organism, the overwhelming necessity to create, so that without the creating of music or poetry or books or buildings or something of meaning, his very breath is cut off from him. He must create, he must pour out creation. By some strange unknown inward urgency, he is not really alive unless he is creating. And when I read that poem, I often just see the many faces of gifted students that I've taught throughout the years. They do a good job of just capturing that intensity. We're going to begin our differentiating journey, and I don't know how much you know about differentiation, but it really got its start in the gifted community, and it has since found a much broader audience through the years. What I'm going to be discussing today focuses mainly on the ideas of Carol Ann Tomlinson and the idea of differentiated instruction. In the end, all learners need your energy, your heart, and your mind. They have it in common because they are young humans. How they need you, however, differs. Unless we understand and respond to those differences, then she feels like we fail many of our students because of that. So as we begin this journey in differentiation, just thought we'd get a few wise words from Charlie and his friend Linus. Our teacher has an interesting theory. She says teaching is like bowling. All you can do is roll the ball down the middle and hope you touch most of the students. And Charlie says, she must be a terrible bowler. And so when I read that cartoon, I see it in practice so often that we kind of teach to the middle and hope for the best. And instead, I want us to begin to think about this idea of differentiating so we're hitting a majority, I think, all of our students. Now, I don't want you in your mind to start to panic and think, oh, she wants me to teach like I'm teaching in a one-room schoolhouse. Little House on the Prairie, that was my favorite show growing up. And if you remember, the teacher had students of varying ages and ability, from young ones all the way through, and basically she spent her days traveling from one student to the other, giving them an individualized type of learning. And that's really not what differentiation is. I want you to think more in lines of a three-ring circus, and we can all get behind that idea because most days, sometimes our classroom feels like a three-ring circus. But when you go to the circus, you'll see a large middle ring. And I want you to think about a large number of your students who fit right into that center ring. And that is your just instruction that you would plan. They're on target or close to target. You teach, they learn the material, and they're fairly successful on grade level. Then you have two circles, one on each side of the main. And one side of the circle is those students who are really below grade level. Doesn't matter how well you teach that middle circle, they're going to have to hear it again. They're going to have to see it again. They're going to have to do it again. That's your remedial group, that below target group. You just know that they're going to have multiple touches with that instruction. Most teachers have this down. They have that middle ring and they have that lower ring. Then I want you to think about that third circle, and that third circle are those students who already know the material that you were going to teach to the big middle circle. If you gave them a pretest, they would knock it out of the park. We often forget about them because they're not usually going to be a struggle with academic work that you have prepared because they'll do well. But do they need something different? And I'm here to say, yes, they do. They need something different. So every time you plan instruction, if you could keep that 3-ring circus in mind, your group in the middle, large group, that are right there on target who are moving towards understanding material, that group that you're going to have to do multiple touches with of your work, of your academic work, and then that group that's going to need something different. And that's my gifted learner, right? So let's work through that together. One size does not fit all. And I know that you understand that. We're just trying to find a way to make this doable. The goal of this class is not that you immediately change everything and move in new directions with all of your work. My goal is that you understand the needs of those gifted learners and you begin to execute that tomorrow. That you look at things differently, that you begin to plan instruction differently. So this is one of those classes that I want you to take away what we're talking about and change what you're doing tomorrow based on what you're learning today. The biggest mistake, and this is from Howard Gardner, who is, of course, our guru for multiple intelligence. The biggest mistake of past centuries is teaching has been to treat all children as if they were variants of the same individual, and thus to feel justified in teaching them all the same subjects in the same way. And there was the dislike button. We would go ahead and push that because I believe that Howard Gardner is indeed correct, that that's not the way we want to go. So let's say that this would be a thumbs down. So I thought I would just share some real personal letters that some gifted students have written over the years to give you an insight into this child that may be sitting in your very classroom, okay? This is for a teacher named Miss Bren. Dear Miss Bren, yesterday you got really, really mad at me in class. I didn't argue with you because that just makes you madder, and being yelled at makes my stomach feel funny. And then I can't think. But I want to say what happened. Maybe you will understand why it looks like that I don't pay attention in your class. You told us to open our books to chapter 4 and read silently. Then you asked everyone to put your hand up if we had finished the 3rd page, and Sean didn't, so you waited for him to finish the page. Then you told us to take turns reading out loud. When you got to me, I asked you what paragraph to start on, and you started yelling at me. You asked me a lot of questions, but you didn't let me answer any of them, and then you answered them yourself, but the things you said, they weren't true answers. This is what happened. I started reading when you said. I finished the chapter and stopped because you got mad, or you do get mad if I read anymore. I didn't get out another book because, well, that makes you mad too. I didn't doodle or do math or talk to Sarah or get up or walk around because those things make you mad. So I worked on my Greek in my head until you called on me. I tried to keep track of where the other kids were when they were reading, and I had the right page. I just didn't hear where Kim stopped. Her voice is so quiet, and the verb I was saying was too loud in my head. So it's not true that I was daydreaming, and I'm not stuck up or arrogant or insolent or any of those things you said I was. I try to follow along, but I can't read that slow. You said you got mad because I was wasting everybody's time, but I just asked, which paragraph, Miss Bren? Look at your watch and say it too. It takes 2 seconds. You could have said the 3rd paragraph. That takes 21 seconds. I timed that too. Then Sarah and Amy R and Amy B would have 6 minutes to read aloud. Instead, you yelled at me for 6 minutes, and they didn't get to read anything. Peter takes almost a whole minute to read, then heard the bear cough behind him. I timed him. It's a game I make up to pay attention instead of doing Greek or making up poems in my head. If I ask you what paragraph and you tell me, it still takes me less than half a minute for me to read a whole paragraph. So I guess I don't understand why you're mad or why you use 6 minutes to tell the class what a bad, stupid, mean person I am because I wasted their time for 4 seconds. I think you wasted their time, and I think you were mean to call me those names in front of everybody. Miss Brin, I want to do what you tell me. I don't understand why I can't keep reading at the end of a chapter, or get out my other books, or study my Greek, or draw or doodle, or write in my journal. But you don't want me to do that, so I don't. But I can't sit and stare at the wall. If I try to do that, I just start thinking about something else. I don't know how to not think. I don't know how to read slow. Please tell me what to do so it won't make you mad at me all the time. And please don't yell at me in class. Love, your sad student, Anne. And when I read this the first time, I was like, whoa. Have I personally done this to kids? And I think I probably have been guilty of this very thing. We don't have class fulls of Anne, but we have Anne in our class. And so many things we do, once again, is to teach to that middle group, not realizing that Anne needs something very different. And I just felt like, from her perspective, what she was thinking and seeing in class would be really powerful for you to hear. I have another student, and this is RG. I know it's been a long time since you heard from me. I wanted to let you know what I'm doing now, and that I think of you often, even though I've not been a particularly faithful correspondent. When you last saw me, you must have had some doubt about what I might do with my life. The interesting thing, though, is that if you did have doubts, you never let me know about them. You treated me as though I had all the possibilities in the world in my hand. The fact that I could not pass a vocabulary test seemed incidental to you. What mattered was what I could do. I didn't get that at the time. I was too exhausted from years of lugging around my disabilities. You need to know that I will be receiving a master's degree in just a few days. My mom asked who I wanted to know about that from back home. You need to know. Your belief in me when I had no belief in myself opened the door that led here. Archie. I guess you can see that the underlying theme here is, do we really know our students? Well, I think with the idea of differentiation, that can lead us on the road to knowing them extremely well and giving them what they need to be successful. So here it is defined by Carol Ann Tomlinson. Differentiated instruction is a teaching philosophy based on the premise that teachers should adapt instruction to student differences. Rather than marching students through the curriculum lockstep, teachers should modify their instruction to meet students' varying readiness levels, learning preferences, and interests. Therefore, the teacher proactively plans a variety of ways to get at and express learning. You can see why this would be so beneficial, not just for our gifted students, for all of our students. This is a chart that you're going to see multiple times in your readings, in my presentations, in your tasks that you do for this class. And I'm quite a visual learner myself, so I thought we would just kind of work through this chart with the word differentiation at the top. It is a teacher's response to learners' needs. It is guided by general principles of differentiation. So looking at the words in gray, when we differentiate, we need to have respectful tasks. Now, sometimes we create tasks for students, and we make some of them stronger than others. And students are very aware of that, and so we need to always have respectful tasks for students. There also needs to be flexible grouping, and there needs to be continual assessment. Those are 3 principles of differentiation that we really need to do well. And we're going to help with that in the next few lessons that we have. Once we have those principles down, then there's several ways to differentiate. We can differentiate the content that we're teaching, the process, and the product. And we differentiate according to students' readiness, Where are they in that 3 rings? Their interest and their learning profile. So while this seems to be a simple chart, this is a chart that we want to have embedded in our thoughts, in our minds, our hearts, as we begin this process of differentiation, because it will indeed help us see our teaching in a whole new light. So, as always, when I think about what something is, I really need to hear what it's not, because that helps me get a better grasp on the concept. So, differentiation is more qualitative than quantitative, and that deals with measure and thinking about whether I can quantify it with numbers or the quality of the information. So we'll talk more about that. Differentiation instruction provides multiple approaches to content, process, and product. You're hearing those 3 things again. It is student-centered. So right now, as a teacher, are you kind of large and in charge, or are you the sage on the stage? Well, we need to rethink that position, because if you really want to differentiate a classroom, you need to become the guide on the side. You need to be the coach. And if you find yourself doing the majority of the talking and being in the front, then that's probably a teacher-driven classroom. To have a really successful, gifted, friendly environment, we want to shift that focus and have student-centered instruction. Differentiated instruction is a blend of whole class, group, and individual instruction. Once again, kind of check yourself. Do you have a variety of those things going on? Differentiated instruction is organic. Interesting choice of words. What is it not? It's not individual instruction. Not the one-room schoolhouse, and everybody gets their own little thing to do. It's not chaotic, and believe it or not, it's really not new. It's just another way to provide homogeneous instruction. You do use flexible grouping instead. It's not modifying grading systems and reducing workloads or increasing workloads. It's not more work for the good students and less indifferent for the poor students. Think of differentiation as a lens you look through when using any materials, programs, or instructional strategies. If you have high quality curriculum materials, then it isn't so much what you use as how you use it to meet those varying needs, interests, and learning profiles of your students. Now, Carolyn Thompson is very clear about this. It's not so much the stuff as the how. If the stuff is ill-conceived, the how is doomed. So if you're already in a burning building and you jump out and things don't really change here too much, look what happens. We jump right back into a burning building. So we need to begin to think of how actually do we differentiate, and we need to start with really good curriculum. To get to the bottom of differentiation, we have to know our students. And here's another student, Alex. Alex fell back in his middle school seat with his mouth open. He felt really dizzy. What crazy things the teacher said. He felt as though he's being pulled limb from limb. What's the matter? Asked the teacher, seeing his bewildered face. Why? Why? Said Alex. I don't know what I am at all. If I'm 4th grade math and 8th grade reading and 6th grade spelling, what grade am I in? The teacher laughed. You aren't any grade at all, no matter where you are in school. You're just yourself, aren't you? What difference does it make what grade you're in? And what's the use of your reading little baby things too easy for you just because you don't know your multiplication tables? So differentiation is equity. We give students what they need. And a lot of times, because we're in such a data-driven environment, we have pigeonholed kids into certain levels and everything. But in reality, we need to step back and really get to know our students, talk to them, hear what they're saying, and figure out a way to meet their needs like she said, just because he is at a 4th grade math level doesn't make him have everything in 4th grade material, because look at what he can do in 8th grade. And so thinking about the flexibility of differentiation in the different groups that he could be in your classroom is really important. So who are you as a learner? And I've provided some tasks for you that would help you in the ideas of who you are as a learner so that you can be a great teacher for your students. But let's think about students in general. Students have strengths and students have weaknesses. It's not the learning the facts, but the training of the mind to think. And of course, we can attribute that to Albert Einstein. So we need to know who's in our classroom, who is sitting in our seats, who are we teaching? Real important piece of differentiated instruction. So I just kind of want to walk through a typical day in a differentiated classroom. What does that look like? It's predictable, but not rigid. So there is a schedule. There are blocks of time for units of study. Procedures are defined and in place. The students are assuming responsibility. There's a voice and choice for students. They're actively involved and engaged in the process. And a variety of materials are used. This idea of flexible grouping, that they can move in and out of those groups, like the 3 rings that we talked about today, occurs regularly. There's a daily reflection on learning, and you have regular community gatherings. Not just for serious matters, but you have them for fun. You know, with our elementary school students, we oftentimes talk about morning meeting and how that can be a platform for what's to come for the day, and that would be a good example of what occurs in a DI differentiated classroom. I kind of wanted to show you this idea, and I've also included this for you for a task to do, to think about your classroom instructional arrangements. Now, I'm here to say that all of these things should be going on. So let's just kind of look at them for a moment. You have whole class activities. You should have small group activities, which would include pairs, triads, quads. And then you have individual activities. And you can also print this out for safekeeping and keep it in your planning book, because it is available for you on Blackboard, to kind of help you see that in addition to these different activities, you're going to have time for student-teacher conferences and make time to talk with them about assessment and guidance and planning as you go along. So your classroom, is it, if you looked at this, do you spend most of your time on whole class activities? Do you spend all your time on small group activities? Just start to think. Give yourself some reflection time to decide what kind of teacher are you with your instructional arrangements. It's kind of that continuum again, and this is the continuum of differentiation. I'm going to have as one of your tasks to do a classroom practices inventory, and you'll find where you are on the continuum as far as DI. This might be the very first time you're even hearing about differentiated instruction and have to do that in your classroom, or you may be well versed in this. So as you take this personal inventory, you can see where you are. Of course, what we always want to do is move on the continuum and make progress. If you're not very far along, what roadblocks are in your way? How can we remove those? Really important questions to ask yourself prior to implementing this idea of DI. I've also included this kind of as a guide for you to begin to think where you are. If you're on the early stages of differentiation, stage 1, you begin by learning about students' interests and learning profile. Maybe you've done some things in your classroom to get to know your students. You establish classroom management procedures, start using pre-assessments to find out students' readiness levels, begin using formative assessments, and you are beginning to experiment with flexible grouping. These are great places to start, and you can begin to do this immediately. If you are more of an intermediate differentiation instruction, that would be stage 2. You're already beginning to design activities to target those students' interests. Not only do you know what they are, you're beginning to design some things for them. You're using data from pre-assessment to design your lessons. You use data from formative assessments. You explore flexible groups, begin using anchor activities, and incorporate learning contracts for some of your students. That's what we consider to be the intermediate implementation stage. If you are in full implementation, which is stage 3, you're targeting students' interests and learning profiles regularly. You continue to use data from the assessments. You implement student-led formative assessment. You broaden flexible grouping. And then you're beginning to use something we call tiering. That might be a new word for you. If it is, we're going to spend some time talking about what that looks like in another lesson. If you are advanced, what are you doing? You're compacting curriculum for some of your students. You're creating themed activities or tiered activities as needed. You ensure all assessments are in alignment. You share responsibility of learning with your students. You address any grading questions, and then you coach your colleagues who are at different levels of implementation. You become the expert in your building. There are 10 strategies for managing a differentiated classroom because it looks different than a regular classroom oftentimes. You need to have a strong rationale for differentiated instruction, and it's based on student readiness, interest, and learning profile. We're going to teach you how to do that. You begin differentiating at a pace that's comfortable for you, and it's going to look different for every person who's watching this video and taking this class. Time differentiated activities for student success. Use anchor activities to free you up to focus your attention on your students. Create and deliver instructions carefully. Have a home base for students. Be sure students have a plan for getting help when you are busy with another student or a group. Give your students as much responsibility for their learning as possible. And engage your students in talking about classroom procedures and group processes. And then there's this idea of flexible grouping. Key component to differentiated instruction. It's really the heart of it. If we can get this part down, we're going to have a great basis for moving forward with differentiated instruction. What does that mean, flexible grouping? Flexible small groups are within class grouping in which membership varies according to ability. Same ability, mixed ability, or it varies based on interest or question, learning styles or processing style, product style, group longevity, group size, can be 2 to 10. Groups can be teacher selected, student selected, purposeful, or random. Very broad ways to do this. A lot of choice. The key is the word flexible. What this would look like would be if I had a student who was not a strong reader, and therefore they were placed in a novel study group or a group where reading selection, they needed a lot of support. And then it came time for our social studies unit. And in that social studies unit, they should not be placed necessarily in the same grouping of the students who needed lots of support for reading. They might be one of your high flyers. Same with math. They need to be able to go in and out of groups often and at will so that there's no stigmatism based on a group. Okay? And that is something well designed that will pay dividends in your classroom long term. It's a critical management strategy. It allows a better instructional match between what your students need and what your students want to know. It lets you tailor learning activities according to students' needs and learning preferences. And the process gives you time to provide additional instruction. So let's say it might be student choice, that you're reading a book on the Civil War, and they're given several books to choose from. Or it could be you're studying the Civil War, and they might be very interested in the battles, and another group might be very interested instead on the uniforms and the different supplies that they needed. So they group in those ways, and then they share with everyone. So flexible grouping is a key to what we're going for here. It should be purposeful, based on a student interest, learning profile, or readiness. Must be based on needs observed during your learning time, and really geared to accomplish those goals you have. The implementation should be purposeful, should be planned, based on the information collected, and that information comes in the form of interest surveys, learning profile inventories. It could be exit cards, it could be quick writes, observations. List groups on overhead, or in my case, I probably put them on the smart board so that they're flexible and I can move them in and out. And then occasionally you implement on the fly. Invitational groups, people organize themselves. But you need to have some caution. Avoid turning groups into tracking situations, which we already mentioned. That's very detrimental to what we're trying to accomplish here. Provide opportunities for students to work with a variety of groups, and practice moving into group situations and assuming roles within the group. That can't just be something that just happens. We have to plan out, and we have to teach those management of those groupings so that everyone's aware of what they're doing within those groups. Do I need to use flexible groups? Well, I think you know that I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to give you some criteria here to think through. If after analyzing pre-assessment data, no powerful differences exist among students, flexible grouping is not necessary. In all my years of doing this, that has rarely happened. Flexible grouping is necessary if after analyzing pre-assessment data, significant differences exist in respect to interest, learning style preferences, expression style preferences, prior knowledge or readiness. In a flexibly grouped classroom, the teacher is trying to ensure that students work in many different grouping arrangements, even over a relatively short period of time. Besides creating an optimal learning experience for all students, flexible groups